Hello everyone, and welcome back to Terrifying Bedtime Tales. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying this video. Again, starting here, the continued parts. Delusion. I decided to investigate further on my own. I examined every inch of the video looking for clues that might identify the person behind it. I noticed a small detail of picture on my wall that had been slightly shifted. It was a photo of my family, and I remembered that the frame had been aligned perfectly the day before someone had been in my home recently enough to alter such details. I revisited the video, focusing on the times when the camera angle was fixed on a particular spot. The footage included scenes from my home office where a stack of papers was slightly disturbed. I recognized the stack. It contained letters and documents related to a local community group I had recently joined. In an effort to piece together this puzzle, I began reviewing my interactions with people from that group. They were all ostensibly friendly and unremarkable, but I started to question if someone might have been hiding a deeper agenda. I also scrutinized my recent conversations and encounters, trying to spot any indication of someone acting unusually or expressing curiosity about my home and routines. One person from the group stood out: Rachel, a woman who had seemed overly interested in my personal life. During our last meeting, she had asked probing questions about my family and my daily habits, framing them in the guise of casual conversation. I brushed off her curiosity at the time, thinking it was just friendly chatter. Determined to find out if Rachel was connected to the video, I reached out to her under the pretense of discussing a community project. I met her at a local cafe where her demeanor was all warmth and charm. However, as our conversation progressed, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was gauging my reactions, searching for any signs of what I had discovered. After the meeting, I began to suspect that Rachel might be connected to the footage. I couldn't prove anything yet, but I decided to set up a small experiment. I began leaving subtle changes in my home, shifting objects, slightly changing the arrangement of furniture, and deliberately leaving out things that would suggest a particular behavior or schedule. The following day, I checked for any alterations or signs of someone having been in my house. To my dismay, I found things moved in exactly the way I had anticipated. If someone were tracking my changes, it confirmed my fear that Rachel or someone else was indeed monitoring my actions closely. But the disturbing reality began to sink in. I was being watched by someone who knew me well enough to exploit my private space for their own purposes. The package had been a chilling wake-up call, a message that I was not alone in my paranoia, but a target in a game that was far from over. The deeper I delved, the more I realized that this was not just about Greg's disappearance or my own nightmares. It was about someone orchestrating a sinister narrative, and I was trapped in the middle of it. As I prepared for the next steps, I knew that uncovering the truth would require navigating a dangerous and intricate web of deception where every detail mattered, and every step could bring me closer to or further away from unveiling the sinister motives behind the intrusion into my life story. 43. The discovery of the diary was an accident, a fluke of fate, or so I thought. It happened on a lazy Sunday afternoon, the kind where the golden light streams in through the windows and time seems to stand still. I had been tackling a long overdue home improvement project, finishing the old wooden floorboards in my living room. I worked methodically, removing the old varnish and sanding the boards until they were smooth. It was during this process that my screwdriver hit something solid beneath the floor. I pried up the loose board and found buried in a shallow cavity an old leather-bound diary. The cover was worn and cracked with age, the binding fragile and fray. I felt a shiver of anticipation mixed with a hint of trepidation. What secrets could this old book possibly hold? The diary had clearly been hidden for decades. The pages yellowed and brittle crackled as I opened them. I eyes skimmed over the elegant flowing script of the first entry dated from the late 1960s. The handwriting was meticulous, almost obsessive, and as I read on, a chill crept over me. The entries began inoculate ly enough, detailing the daily routines of the diarist, but as I continued, the content became eerily personal. The writer described events and emotions with a disturbing level of detail and accuracy, events that mirrored my own life with unsettling precision. The first entry that caught my eye was dated October 12, 1969. It spoke of a recent move to a new house in a quiet neighborhood. The writer detailed the excitement and anxiety of starting anew, and then went on to describe the house with uncanny accuracy, right down to the very layout and decor. I shivered as I read the description of the living room, the one I was currently refurbishing. As I turned the pages, it became clear that the diary was a chronicle of events that had unfolded in my life, or rather in the life of someone who looked exactly like me. The writer described personal milestones with precise detail: the first day of school, the awkward teenage years, and even the recent breakup with my long-term partner. Each entry felt like a direct reflection of my own experiences. One particular entry dated August 14th, 1975 described a harrowing event that had happened to the writer. The very event I had experienced a few years prior. The diary detailed a car accident in eerie detail, from the location and the impact to the aftermath and the lingering pain. I had never spoken publicly about this incident, and yet here it was documented with intimate knowledge. The further I read, the more I became entangled in the writer's life. The diary recounted not just my experiences, but also my deepest fears and insecurities. There were detailed observations about my family, my friends, and even the way I thought. The entries took on a darker tone as the writer's observations grew more intrusive and unsettling. In one entry dated January 2nd, 1980, the writer described a night spent awake, haunted by a sense of being watched. They detailed feelings of paranoia and dread, feelings that had plagued me on many a restless night. The descriptions were so accurate that it felt like reading a page from my own personal journal. My hands trembled as I turned the pages, struggling to understand the connection between myself and this mysterious writer. How could someone have known so much about my life, my innermost thoughts and experiences? The diary had been hidden in the floorboards of my own house, which only added to the creeping sense of invasion. Then came the most disturbing entry dated October 3rd, 1982. It described a confrontation with a stranger who had appeared at the writer's door, asking questions about their life and experiences. The stranger seemed to know personal details, and the encounter ended with the writer feeling profoundly unsettled and violated. I realized with a jolt that this entry mirrored a recent incident in my life, when an unfamiliar person had approached me with probing questions about my past. I couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. Who was this writer, and why did their life so closely resemble mine? Had someone been following me all these years, documenting my every move? And thought I began to question the very fabric of my own reality. Was this diary a record of my life, or had I somehow become part of someone else's story? The final entries were the most cryptic. They spoke of a growing sense of paranoia, the feeling of being trapped in a cycle with no way out. The writer described an impending sense of doom, the sensation of being observed from the shadows. The entries ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted or silenced. As I closed the diary, the room felt suddenly colder. The light from the afternoon sun less comforting. The discovery had opened a door to something I wasn't prepared to face. The diary's revelations had not only mirrored my life, but had also introduced an unsettling possibility that my reality had been manipulated or observed in ways I couldn't fully comprehend. I replaced the floorboard carefully, feeling the weight of the hidden knowledge. The diary remained a haunting reminder of a life entwined with my own, and the unanswered questions GW at me who written it, and why was my life truly my own, or was I merely a chapter in someone else's story? As night fell, I sat alone in my living room, the diary resting beside me. The house, once a sanctuary, now seemed laden with secrets and shadows. The diary's presence was a stark reminder that there were aspects of my existence beyond my understanding, lurking just beneath the surface story. 44. The rain was relentless. That evening, a constant drumming against the windows. As I sat at my kitchen table, the dim light casting long shadows across the room, the mysterious phone calls and unsettling gifts had left me on edge, but what had happened today had escalated the situation to a new level of fear. It began when I was at a local coffee shop trying to escape the chaos of my apartment and clear my mind. As I sipped my coffee, a stranger approached me. He was an elderly man with a weathered face and eyes that seemed to have seen too much. He wore a long dark coat and carried a satchel that seemed worn with age. "Excuse me," he said in a voice that was raspy yet compelling. "I believe this belongs to you." He handed me a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked and faded, giving it an aura of forgotten history. I looked at him confused. "I don't understand. Why are you giving me this?" The man's eyes were intense, almost pleading. "I cannot explain much, but the journal holds answers. You must read it before it's too late." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the rainy night. I stared at the journal for a moment before carefully opening it. The pages were yellowed with age, and the handwriting was elegant yet erratic, as if written in haste. The first few entries were mundane, detailing the writer's daily life and minor events. But as I continued, I noticed something disturbing. Each entry seemed to predict future events with unnerving accuracy. The entry started with ordinary observations, but quickly took a darker turn. They described incidents that I could distinctly remember happening, sometimes down to the smallest details. My pulse quickened as I realized that these were not just random events, they were my own experiences recorded before they had happened. The journal described a period of intense personal conflict, foretelling arguments and betrayals that had actually occurred. It even mentioned my recent phone calls and gifts, describing them with chilling precision. Whoever had written this journal had known about my life in an eerie and unsettling way. The entries grew more ominous as I read on. One entry described a foreboding situation where the writer had been followed home, their movements carefully watched. It detailed how the writer was trapped in their own home with the invader closing in on them. The description matched my own experience of feeling watched and being unable to catch the rare on camera. My anxiety mounted with each line I read. I flipped through the pages, desperate to find something hopeful or reassuring. Instead, the journal's predictions grew increasingly violent and disturbing. It described future events with vivid detail, including an encounter that would take place in my own home. The final entry, written in bold, frantic script, sent a shiver down my spine. August 12th, 2024. The time is near. The darkness that has been creeping into your life will soon reach its climax. The one who watches and writes has seen your every move and is coming to collect tonight. As the clock strikes 12, you will face the culmination of their plans. The mirror you've received is the gateway. Beware, for the final act is about to unfold. My hands trembled as I read the final words. I could hardly breathe, my mind racing to piece together the message. The journal seemed to suggest that the strange occurrences in my life were not random, but part of a calculated plan by someone who knew my future and had sinister intentions. I glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. The sense of dread that had been creeping into my life now felt palpable, like a cold hand wrapping around my heart. I knew I had to confront whatever awaited me, but the idea of facing an unknown threat was terrifying. With the journal clutched tightly in my hand, I made my way to the living room where the mirror, the latest gift, stood ominously. The mirror's ornate frame seemed to glint with a malevolent energy. I had noticed it earlier, but its significance had not fully hit me until Now the journal's warning had mentioned it as a gateway. As the clock struck 12, I stood. In front of the mirror, the room bed in a dim, eerie light. My reflection stared back at me, but the air seemed to grow colder, and shadows danced around the edges of the glass. My pulse pounded in my ears as I waited for something to happen. Nothing seemed to change at first, and just as I began to question the journal's validity, I heard a noise behind me, a soft, almost imperceptible rustling. I turned slowly to find nothing but the emptiness of my living room. But then a voice echoed from the mirror, the same voice I had heard during the phone call. "You've done well to arrive," it said with a chilling calmness. "Now let's see how you handle the final act." My reflection began to distort, and I saw a figure emerging from within the mirror surface, a shadowy silhouette of a person. Panic surged through me, and I tried to back away, but my feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The figure stepped out, taking on a more defined shape. It was the same elderly man who had given me the journal. "You shouldn't have meddled," he said, his voice now resonating with a deep, menacing tone. "This was never meant for you." The room felt like it was closing in, and I could feel the weight of the stranger's intentions pressing down on me. Desperation gave me strength, and I grabbed the journal, throwing it against the mirror with all my might. The glass shattered, and the figure vanished with the splintered reflections. In the aftermath, the mirror was a broken mess, and the room fell silent. I was left standing in the debris, my heart racing, unsure of what had just transpired. The journal lay amidst the shards, its pages fluttering as if whispering secrets I could no longer decipher. I had survived the night, but the experience left me shaken, and with more questions than answers. The journal was now a relic of a night that had blurred the lines between reality and the supernatural. It was clear that the stranger's predictions were not merely about observing my life, but manipulating it in ways I could scarcely comprehend. The ominous message had warned me of the final act, but I was left to grapple with the consequences of having survived it, unsure of what future awaited me in the wake of that chilling confrontation. Story 45. It was a crisp November evening when I first noticed something was amiss. With Max, we had been friends since college, bonded over late-night study sessions, shared jokes, and countless weekends spent exploring new restaurants and cafes in the city. Max had always been the reliable one, the friend who never missed a beat when it came to being supportive. So when he started to act strangely, it was both confusing and alarming. It began subtly. Max's phone seemed to be constantly vibrating, and he would often excuse himself from our conversations to answer calls in hushed tones. When he did talk, he was curt and evasive, a stark contrast to his usual easygoing demeanor. His once frequent texts and calls became sporadic, and he started to cancel our plans with increasing frequency. I brushed off my concerns, initially attributing them to a busy work schedule or perhaps some personal issues he didn't want to share. But then I found myself in the middle of an unsettling discovery. It happened on a Saturday when I decided to surprise Max by dropping by his apartment to return a book one had borrowed. The front door was ajar, which was unusual given Max's usual fastidiousness about security. I knocked before stepping inside, and what I saw next froze me in my tracks. The apartment, usually tidy, was a disarray of clutter and strange item stacks of unmarked envelopes, a few hastily concealed weapons, and a large duffel bag stuffed with cash. My mind raced, struggling to reconcile this hidden world with the Max I knew before I could process the implications. I heard the clatter of footsteps approaching. Panicked, I ducked behind a stack of boxes and waited, my heart pounding. Max entered the room, his expression shifting from confusion to shock when he saw the state of his apartment. "Hey, what are you doing here?" he demanded, trying to mask his alarm. "I was returning a book," I stammered, "but it looks like something's going on." "What's all this?" Max's face hardened. "It's not what you think. You shouldn't be here." His reaction confirmed my fears. He was hiding something, and whatever it was serious. I decided to leave telling him I'd come back another time, but the seed of suspicion had been planted deep within me. Over the next few weeks, I did some digging of my own. I found out that Max had been involved in a series of illicit activities that directly impacted my own safety. The first sign came when a friend from my building was robbed. The incident was brazen, and frightening robbers had broken into their apartment in broad daylight. And though they took valuables, nothing indicated they were looking for anything specific. When I spoke to my friend, they mentioned seeing a few masked individuals lingering around the building in the days leading up to the robbery. Alarmed, I checked the local news and discovered similar crimes reported across the city. Each robbery seemed to follow a pattern. The criminals knew exactly when to strike and where to find their targets. A troubling thought formed in my mind. What if Max's activities were connected to these crimes? I began to notice odd coincidences. Max seemed increasingly agitated whenever the topic of crime came up, and his demeanor was noticeably more defensive. His recent erratic behavior, combined with the discovery of cash and weapons in his apartment, suggested he was deeply entangled in something far darker than I could have imagined. Unable to ignore the mounting evidence, I confronted Max. It was a tense evening filled with raw emotions and guarded confessions. Max finally admitted he was involved in a criminal ring, but he insisted he was only a small player handling logistics and money transfers. But he assured me he had no direct involvement in the robberies, but his guilt was palpable. Why didn't you come to me for help? I asked, my voice shaking. Why drag me into this mess? Max's eyes were filled with remorse. I didn't want you to be part of this. I thought I could keep it separate. I never meant for you to get hurt. Despite his assurances, I couldn't shake the fear that his involvement might have put me and my loved ones at risk. Max offered to help me with security measures and promised to get out of the criminal world for good, but the damage was done. I took precautions, installing security systems in my home, changing routines, and being more vigilant about my surroundings. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. A friend I had trusted implicitly was now a source of potential danger. Though Max followed through on his promise to distance himself from his criminal ties, the sense of safety was hard to restore. As time passed, Max became a shadow of the friend I once knew. Our relationship changed fundamentally. I struggled with the duality of his existence. The friend who had once been so dependable now seemed like a stranger with a dark past. Despite the fear and mistrust, I found myself hoping for Max's redemption. I wanted to believe that people could change, that his desire to leave behind his criminal activities was genuine, but the scars left by the experience were deep, and trust is not easily mended. In the end, I learned the harsh reality that people can live double lives, and those hidden sides can profoundly impact those closest to them. While I hoped for Max's redemption, I understood that the betrayal would linger, a reminder of the shadows that can hide behind even the most familiar faces. Story 46. The room had been there all along, hidden just behind the walls of my house. But it was only now that I discovered its existence. It was an overcast afternoon when I stumbled upon the concealed space, the dim light from the cloudy sky barely penetrating the gloom of my basement. My house had always been a haven for me, nestled in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was where I had built a life of comfort and familiarity. However, that sense of security had been eroded over the past few weeks. Strange occurrences, unexplained noises, and the mysterious disappearance of my dog Max had left me feeling uneasy in what was supposed to be my sanctuary. It all began when I was tidying up the basement, attempting to reclaim some sense of normally. The basement, with its cluttered storage and forgotten relics, had always been a place of disorganization. As I was moving boxes and old furniture, I noticed something odd, an area of the wall that felt different, a section that seemed to be slightly askew. Curiosity got the better of me, and I inspected the wall more closely. To my astonishment, I discovered that it wasn't a solid wall, but a cleverly concealed door, its edges barely visible against the surrounding structure, I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that the door had been expertly hidden, likely for a long time. With trembling hands, I pried open the door. It creaked ominously as it swung inward, revealing a small dark room that had been sealed off for years. The air inside was musty, thick with dust and neglect. I hesitated, the unsettling feeling of trespassing on forbidden territory making my heart pound. But I knew I had to see what was inside. The room was sparsely furnished. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, casting a weak flickering light. What caught my eye immediately, however, were the walls. They were covered with photographs, hundreds of them meticulously arranged in a disturbing collage. The photos were of me, captured in various moments of my life, some mundane, others intensely private. The first set of photos showed me at everyday activities, leaving for work, grocery shopping, relaxing in my living room. As I scanned the images, my unease grew. It was clear that these were taken from a distance, capturing me in my most routine moments. But as I continued to examine the collection, the images grew more invasive. There were pictures of me sleeping taken through my bedroom window. Others showed me in intimate moments that were meant to be private, captured with an unsettling precision. The walls were also adorned with strange notes and markings scribbled in a hurried scroll. They seemed to be a mix of observations, cryptic messages, and personal reflections. One note read, "She's always so peaceful at night," while another said, "The walls hold her secrets." The messages were disjointed, but they painted a disturbing picture of someone who had been obsessively watching me. In the center of the room was a table covered with more evidence of the intruder's presence. There were notebooks filled with handwritten entries detailing observations about my daily life. The entries were alarmingly detailed, recounting not just my activities, but also my thoughts and feelings, as if the writer had been privy to my innermost thoughts. I felt a surge of panic as I realized the extent to which someone had invaded my privacy. The knowledge that I had been under constant surveillance, my every move scrutinized, left me feeling exposed and vulnerable. It was as if my entire life had been a subject of someone's obsessive fascination. I noticed a small, old-fashioned video camera in the corner of the room. It was dusty and appeared to have been there for a long time. As I approached it, my hands shook uncontrollably. The camera was connected to a recording device. I hesitated for a moment before pressing the play button. The screen flickered to life, showing grainy footage of my home taken from various hidden cameras. The footage depicted intimate moments of my life, moments I had never suspected were being recorded. The video showed not only my daily routines, but also my most private and vulnerable moments. The realization that someone had and watching me, recording my life without my knowledge, was horrifying. As I sat in the dim light of the hidden room, I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. The room had been meticulously maintained, indicating that the person who had created this disturbing space had a long-term plan. They had been watching me, studying me, and documenting my every move with an unsettling precision. I tried to piece together who might have done this and why. I thought of the mysterious note I had found on Max's new collar, the one suggesting that my home was not as safe as I believed. The note seemed to be a precursor to this discovery, a hint at the hidden dangers lurking in my life. It became clear that whoever had been watching me had planned their intrusion meticulously, leaving nothing to chance. The discovery of the hidden room was both a revelation and a curse. It answered some of my questions, but also raised many more. Who had done this? Why had they chosen to invade my life so thoroughly? And most importantly, what were their intentions? As I left the room, sealing the door behind me, I knew I had to take immediate action. I needed to contact the authorities to report the invasion of my privacy and the disturbing evidence I had uncovered. But I also needed to protect myself, to ensure that the person responsible for this intrusion was held accountable and that my home could once again be a place of safety. The hidden room had shattered the illusion of security I had once taken For granted, my home, once a sanctuary, had become a place of fear and uncertainty. The revelations of that dark, concealed space would forever alter my sense of safety and privacy, leaving me with a haunting awareness of how closely someone had been watching me all along. Story 47. The first message arrived on a dreary Tuesday morning, nestled in the corner of my inbox among the usual spam and promotional offers. The subject line was innocuous enough: "We need to talk." I clicked on it, absent-mindedly expecting a routine email. Instead, my heart sank as I read the chilling content. "Hello, your name. I've been keeping an eye on you. I know things about you that you wouldn't want others to find out. If you don't comply with my demands, I'll make sure your deepest secrets are exposed." The message was anonymous, signed only with a cryptic symbol I didn't recognize. Attached was a photograph of me leaving my apartment, taken from a distance. It was clear that the sender had been watching me closely. Panic surged through me. I checked the rest of my emails, but there were no other clues. I debated whether to inform the authorities, but decided to tread carefully. The message's contents were unsettling, but vague. It was also possible that someone was merely trying to intimidate me. The next day, a second email arrived. This one contained personal details that only someone close to me would know: information about my mother's recent illness and a family vacation we had planned. The message demanded I transfer a significant amount of money to an offshore account. The threat was direct: if I didn't comply, they would release compromising information about me. I was horrified. The knowledge that someone had access to such intimate details about my life made me feel exposed and vulnerable. I had no idea who could be behind this. I hadn't shared these details with anyone outside my immediate circle, and none of my friends or family seemed like they would do this. Desperate, I contacted the police. They took my case seriously and began investigating the anonymous threats. They traced the email to an IP address, but found that it had been routed through multiple proxies, making it nearly impossible to pinpoint the sender's exact location. The blackmail continued, and each message was more menacing than the last. The demands escalated. The next email instructed me to attend a specific location at a certain time, or they would release footage of me in a compromising situation. It was a video of me recorded in my own home while I was asleep. The invasion of privacy was horrifying, and I was forced to comply, hoping it would be the end. I started to feel the news tightening around me. The anonymous sender seemed to know my every move, orchestrating events from the shadows. My sense of safety was obliterated. I began to second-guess everyone around me, struggling to identify who might be involved. Each interaction became a potential clue or a lead in this terrifying game. One evening, after following the latest set of instructions, I was met with another email, this one containing even more personal information. They knew about a recent argument I had with a friend and a secret I had shared in confidence. The sender demands were growing increasingly outrageous, and the situations they put me in were becoming dangerously public. The turning point came when the blackmailer demanded did I break into a secured facility to obtain a confidential document. I was horrified by the idea, but they threatened that failure to comply would result in exposing a scandalous lie about a close family member. The stakes were too high, and I was left with no choice but to carry out their demands. I meticulously planned the break-in, hoping it would fulfill the blackmailer demands and free me from their grip. As I entered the facility, I felt a mix of dread and determination. Every shadow seemed menacing, every noise amplified in my heightened state of fear. I completed the task, but the blackmailer's hold was not easily shaken. The next email contained a new threat. I had to sabotage a public event I was scheduled to speak at. The idea of harming my own reputation and career was unbearable, but the blackmailer threats left me with little choice. I was trapped in a web of manipulation. In fear, the final confrontation came unexpectedly. One night, as I was returning home, I received a call from a block The voice on the other end was distorted, but unmistakably familiar. It was someone I knew well, someone I had once trusted implicitly. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. The blackmailer was someone from my inner circle. In a state of shock, I confronted this person, revealed feeling that I knew their identity. They were initially defensive, but eventually broke down, admitting their actions. The motives were complex: jealousy, resentment, and a desperate need for control. They had used their knowledge of my life to manipulate and coerce me into fulfilling their demands. The authorities were able to apprehend the blackmailer, and the threat ceased. The emotional toll was immense. The betrayal left deep scars, and I struggled to rebuild my sense of trust and security. The experience had shattered my sense of safety and had exposed the vulnerabilities in my life that I hadn't fully acknowledged. In the aftermath, I sought therapy to help process the trauma and began taking steps to restore my sense of normalcy. I implemented stronger security measures and became more cautious about who I let into my life. The ordeal was a harsh reminder of the fragility of trust and the importance of safeguarding personal information. As time passed, I gradually found a semblance of peace. The shadows of the past continued to linger, but I worked diligently to rebuild my life and regain control over my sense of security. The experience had changed me, but it also fortified my resolve to face challenges with resilience and vigilance. Story 48. The discovery came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Noon. I had spent the morning sifting through old family documents and personal files, trying to get my life in order after the recent string of unsettling events. The house was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards, as if it were a participant in the quiet tension that had gripped me for weeks. It was then that I stumbled upon an envelope buried in a stack of papers. The envelope was marked with a stamp from a law firm I didn't recognize. Curiosity piqued. I carefully opened it. Inside was a letter from a lawyer's office detailing an array of legal issues surrounding a series of transactions and agreements made in my name. My heart pounded as I skimmed through the letter, which mentioned several business deals, property purchases, and even a lease agreement for a luxury apartment, none of which I had ever authorized or even heard of. The letter described the transactions as being conducted by someone when using my name and personal information. It was clear that someone had managed to create a false identity with my details and was living a life dangerously close to my own. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine as I read through the details, each line adding to the weight of my dread. The document included addresses, bank accounts, and even a list of phone numbers associated with this imposter. I spent the next few hours frantically trying to piece together what had happened. I called the lawyer's office for more information, but they were unhelpful, insisting that I needed to contact the police or a fraud investigator to resolve the matter. I made a quick call to the police department, but they seemed overwhelmed and advised me to file a formal report in person. The following morning, I arrived at the local police station, clutching the letter in a folder filled with my own personal documents for comparison. The officer who took my report court was skeptical but sympathetic. He promised to pass the information on to a fraud specialist within the department. It wasn't much, but it was a start. As I left the station, I felt a growing sense of unease. The thought of someone out there living a life that was almost identical to my own was disorienting. I couldn't shake the feeling that this imposter might be lurking closer than I realized. I had to act quickly to protect my identity and stop any further damage. I took the advice of the police and contacted a private investigator, a woman named Linda with a reputation for handling complex fraud cases. She arrived at my house the next day and took stock of the situation. Linda was professional and efficient, immediately setting to work by tracking down the addresses and phone numbers listed in the lawyer's letter. As Linda dug into the details, I did my own digging. I contacted my bank to report the potential fraud and placed a fraud alert on my credit report. I also reached out to the various institutions mentioned in the letter, notifying them of the identity. Theft was a disheartening process, but I was determined to fight. Linda's investigation led her to several addresses linked to the imposter. The first few were dead ends, vacant properties, or businesses that had long since closed. However, one address stood out. It was a high-end apartment complex in a part of town I wasn't familiar with. Linda suggested we check it out. The following week we arrived at the apartment complex. It was an upscale building with a polished lobby and a doorman who eyed us suspiciously. As we entered, Linda flashed her credentials and explained the situation. The doorman, though initially reluctant, eventually agreed to help. He confirmed that a person matching the impost's description had indeed been living in one of the units, but they had recently moved out. We obtained the forwarding address from the building's records. With this new information, Linda and I drove to the new address, a posh neighborhood on the outskirts of town. As we approached the residence, a sense of urgency consumed me. I wondered what kind of life this imposter had been leading, and if it had any connection to the ominous messages in the mysterious grave I had encountered. The new residence was a well-maintained townhouse. Linda knocked on the door while I waited anxiously. After a few moments, a young woman in her early 30s answered. She looked puzzled as Linda explained the situation and showed her credentials. I don't know what you're talking about, the woman said, her voice trembling slightly. I've been living here for a few months, but I've never used anyone else's identity. Linda was sharp and unyielding. She questioned the woman further, and after some pressing, it became clear that the woman had been a victim of the imposter actions as well. She had been duped into renting the townhouse under false pretenses, believing she was dealing with legitimate agents. With the woman's cooperation, Linda was able to gather more information. It turned out the imposter had been using various stolen identities to live a life of luxury while leaving a trail of deceit and fraud. We discovered that this individual had not only been mimicking my life, but had also been involved in multiple illegal activities. The investigation eventually led to a larger network of fraud and identity theft. The imposter was apprehended, and the authorities were able to piece together the full extent of the crimes. The stolen identity was deactivated, and measures were put in place to prevent further misuse. The relief was palpable, but the ordeal left me shaken. The experience had eroded my sense of security and trust. One had to rebuild my life from the ground up, and though the immediate threat was gone, the scars of the invasion lingered. As I began to piece my life back together, I couldn't help but reflect on the strange series of events that had brought me to this point. The cryptic messages, the grave, and the imposter had all seemed like disconnected threads, but they had woven a chilling tapestry of deceit and danger. Despite the resolution, I remained vigilant, forever changed by the haunting experience of living under the shadow of an imposter who had dangerously mirrored my own existence. Story 49. The quiet hum of my laptop filled the room as I worked from my home office, a space I had meticulously arranged for comfort and efficiency. The workday had been going smoothly until a curious discovery interrupted my concentration. It was late afternoon when I decided to take a short break and stretch my legs. As I walked around the office, I noticed something unusual on my desk, a large manila envelope that I didn't remember placing there. I approached the desk with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. The envelope was unmarked and bore no return. Addressed with a sense of unease, I carefully opened it and pulled out a thick dossier. The first page was a cover sheet with my name prominently displayed, followed by a title that sent a shiver down my spine. Personal research report. The initial shock quickly gave way to a frantic urge to understand what I was dealing with. I flipped through the pages, each one more unsettling than the last. The dossier was an extensive compilation of information about my life, meticulously organized and alarmingly detailed. It seemed as though someone had been shadowing me for months, if not years. The first section was a detailed biography. It included basic facts like my full name, birth date, and educational background, but it went far beyond that. It detailed every job I had held, including brief periods of employment that I had long forgotten. There were notes on my previous addresses, complete with maps and handwritten observations about my daily routines. As I turned the page, the dossier shifted to a more personal realm. There were sections on my family and friends containing photographs of my relatives and friends, some of which had been taken at social gatherings I had thought were private. It listed names, relationships, and even personal anecdotes. The level of detail was chilling. It was as if someone had been present at every significant moment of my life, documenting everything with an unsettling precision. The dossier included an exhaustive section on my work habits and professional achievements. It detailed projects I had completed, meetings I had attended, and even private conversations I had had with colleagues. There were notes on my work preferences, my strengths and weaknesses, and even my typical work hours. It was as if someone had been monitoring my every move, scrutinizing my performance and behaviors. The next section was devoted to my personal interests and hobbies. A catalog my favorite activities, the places I frequented, and my travel history. There were entries on books I had read, movies I had watched, and restaurants I had dined at. I found lists of my favorite recipes, detailed notes on my fitness routine, and even observations about my online shopping habits. The dossier then moved into more troubling territory in my private life. It contained information about my relationships, including romantic interests. There were detailed notes about past and present partners, including intimate details I had never shared publicly. It seemed as though someone had been piecing together every fragment of my personal history, from the mundane to the deeply personal. The final section of the dossier was the most disturbing. It was a collection of handwritten notes and photographs that detailed my daily routines in recent months. There were descriptions of my morning routine, my visits to the gym, and even my interactions with neighbors. The photographs included images of me leaving my house, walking to my car, and sitting in local cafes. Some of these images were so recent that they could only have been taken in the last few weeks. Panic surged through me as I realized the extent of the invasion. It was clear that someone had been stalking me, gathering information and documenting my every move. The thoroughness of the research suggested a level of obsession that was both alarming and frightening. I couldn't fathom who could have done this, or why they would be so intent on monitoring my life so closely. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing thoughts. The first step was to contact the authorities. I dialed the police, providing them with all the details of the dossier and the unsettling discovery. They assured me they would send someone over to investigate, but the wait felt interminable. While waiting, I took inventory of my home and office, checking for any signs of tampering or surveillance equipment. I found nothing out of the ordinary, but the feeling of being watched was pervasive. I considered the possibility that the dossier might have been intended as a form of intimidation or manipulation rather than a genuine threat. Nevertheless, the sense of violation was profound. The police arrived and took the dossier into evidence. They conducted a preliminary investigation, including questioning me about any potential suspects or recent conflicts. I couldn't think of anyone who would have had a motive to invade my privacy to this extent. The investigation, they said, would take time, and they promised to keep me informed of any developments in the weeks that followed. I made several changes to my routine in home security. I installed additional security cameras, changed my passwords, and began to be more cautious about my personal information. The experience left me feeling exposed and wary, but I was determined not to let it consume my life. Despite the police investigation and the increased security measures, the dossier remained a haunting reminder of the breach. The sense of being watched never fully dissipated, and I found myself constantly on edge. The case remained unsolved, leaving me with more questions than answers. I slowly tried to return to a semblance of normalcy, but the experience had left an indelible mark. The dossier was a stark reminder of how easily one's privacy could be compromised, and it served as a chilling lesson in the importance of vigilance and security in an increasingly intrusive world. Story 50. It was a chilly November afternoon when I met Ethan R. at a quaint cafe in downtown. Ethan was a well-known author whose books were renowned for their intricate plots and deep psychological insights. I had been struggling with my own manuscript and novel that I had been working on for months, but felt had hit a creative wall when Ethan, whom I had reached out to for advice, agreed to help. I was thrilled. It felt like a golden opportunity to inject some fresh ideas into my work and perhaps overcome the creative stagnation I had been facing. Our initial meeting was casual, filled with talk about writing processes, publishing, and the occasional sip of coffee. Ethan was articulate and charismatic, and he seemed genuinely interested in my novel's premise. He offered constructive feedback and suggestions, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose as we discussed my characters and plot. His insights were sharp, and his enthusiasm was infectious. I left the cafe feeling invigorated, eager to incorporate his suggestions into my manuscript. Over the following weeks, Ethan and I continued our correspondence. He provided detailed notes on my drafts, and our discussions frequently shifted from emails to phone calls. As I began implementing his suggestions, I noticed that his ideas, while brilliant, seemed to increasingly parallel events from my own life, events that were intensely personal and in some cases unsettling. One of Ethan's early